Hello guys, good day to everyone. This video is just the continuation of the first video we had regarding on how to make research framework. Okay, and in the first video, we already discussed the theoretical framework as the first type of conceptual framework na pwede natin gamitin. And ngayon, pag-uusapan natin yung second type of conceptual framework na meron tayo, which is known as the causal framework. Okay, so we are done in discussing the theoretical framework. And in this video, we will now be proceeding on the second one, which is known as the causal framework. Now, pag sinabi natin causal framework from the name itself, it talks about the relationship that exists between the variables that we have in our research paper. In particular, it talks about how one variable or two variables, it depends on the number of independent variable that you have, influence or influences the dependent variable. So ulitin ko lang ha, pag sinabi natin causal framework, usually ito yung type of framework na ginagamit kung ang ating methodology or yung ating research design as well as ang objective natin is maipakita yung relationships na nag-exists between the variables that we have. In particular, how, for instance, our independent variable causes influence to our dependent variable. And the main intention kung bakit natin ginagawa ang causal framework is para maipakita natin yung flow, no, or yung pathway ng changes na nag-exist sa ating mga variables. Okay po? And now, alam na natin kung ano yung ibig sabihin ng causal framework at kung kailan siya ginagamit. Let's now talk about ano ba yung mga guidelines na kailangan i-consider ng mga researchers kapag magagawa sila ng tinatawag natin na causal framework. Okay. The first thing that you need to do when you created a causal framework is that dapat appropriately na-identify mo na kung ano ba yung mga key variables na meron tayo sa research paper natin. Okay? Technically, ang key variables na kailangan mong ma-identify dito ay yung mga sumusunod. You have to identify the independent variable of your research paper and the dependent variable. I have a separate discussion regarding independent and dependent variables. So you may also watch that video for you to be informed. Ano ba yung independent at dependent variable? Ano yung pinagkaiba nila and some examples of that. But aside from that, kailangan mo din ma-identify yung tinatawag natin na mediating or moderating variable. Bakit kailangan nating ma-identify yung tatlong variables na to? Yung independent, yung dependent, and mediating variables. Kasi ito yung tutulong sa atin for the second guideline, which is to appropriately establish the relationship that exists between all the variables that we have. Kailangan daw maipakita natin yung relationship na nag-e-exist doon sa mga variables na meron tayo. Ngayon, sir, paano po namin maipapakita yung nag-e-exist na relationship sa mga variables na ito? That is by using arrows or lines to indicate the direction of influence na meron tayo sa mga variables natin. Take note, my dear researchers, in the context of making conceptual framework, kahit anong conceptual framework pa yan, kahit yan ay causal, IPO, process, or descriptive, napaka-critical ng mga arrows or ng mga lines na ginagamit natin because technically it indicates the flow or the direction of the influence or effect. Kapag nagkamali tayo ng paglalagay ng arrow, maaari itong maging dahilan para tayo ay matanong ng mga panelists natin, which is yun ang pinaka-iniiwasan natin. Okay po? And then after that, you have to explain the mechanism. Technically, yung pag-explain ng mechanism, ito ay in a narrative or descriptive format na. Kailangan lang natin maipaliwanag ah ano ba yung relationship na nag-exist sa mga variables natin. And ano yung meron sa mga variables na yun. We just have to describe them, paano sila nag-exist. Later on, I will be showing you a sample of that. Then, ang pinakamahalaga na feature or katangian na dapat meron yung ating causal framework is yung tinatawag natin na visual representation. Kasi sa visual representation, dito natin maipapakita yung sinasabi sa guideline number 2, which is establish the relationship. Okay? Though pwede natin siyang ipakita sa pamamagitan ng narrative, mas madali itong ipakita kung tayo ay gagamit ng visual representation. Kaya most of the time, the researchers were called to make a visual representation of their causal framework para madaling makita ng mga readers at mga panelists yung relationship na nag-exist sa kanila. Then after that, halimbawa, meron na tayong visual representation of that, kailangan natin ma-justify or maipaliwanag sa ating mga readers yung ginawa nating visual representation. That will serve as our research paradigm. Okay po. So ngayon, alam na natin yung 5 basic guidelines sa paggagawa ng causal framework. Let's now talk about an example of this causal framework. Okay po. So dito tayo sa pinakaibaba. So kung mapapansin nyo dito, okay, meron tayong narrative, meron din tayong picture or illustration, figure. Let's try to process ano ba yung nilalaman ito. Number 1, ito. Don't forget the name, the causal framework. Then, sa pinaka-itaas ng ating visual illustration or graphical illustration, meron muna tayong brief introductory statement na kung saan mini-mention or sinasabi natin yung mga key variables na present doon sa ating diagram or doon sa ating figure. Ito yung figure natin. So ano ba yung mga variables na nakalagay dyan? Nakalagay dito. In the realm of organizational behavior, understanding the factors that influence employee retention is paramount. So they have here a brief introductory statement. After that, this study proposes a causal framework that examines the interplay between 3 key independent variables. Ano daw yung 3 independent variables na yon? We have job satisfaction, no? Na-identify na natin yung mga variables, organizational commitment, and workplace. Okay? And then, ano yung kanilang impact doon sa tinatawag natin na employee retention, which will serve as the dependent variable of your paper. Ngayon, for recommendation, kasi walang nakalagay dito sa ating sample, it will be better, like what I have mentioned to the guidelines a while ago, if you will identify mediating or moderating variables sana. Okay po, pero hindi sa lahat ng pagkakataon merong ganun ha. Minsan independent and dependent variable lang yung inilalagay, pero may pagkakataon na kasama din yung moderating variable. Okay, pero kung kaya natin mag-identify ng moderating variable and this moderating variable is important, pwede natin siyang gawin. In this example lang, walang nakalagay. So they have here a brief introductory about the variables that were present on the figure, which is figure number 1. The graphical illustration, which is guideline number 4. So ito yung kanilang graphical illustration. Job satisfaction as the independent variable, organizational commitment as independent variable, and workplace as the independent variable. Kung mapapansin ninyo, they used a single-headed arrow na ang linya ay mula sa job satisfaction papunta sa employee retention, organizational commitment papunta sa employee retention, and workplace structures papunta sa employee retention. Sa madalit sabi, ibig sabihin niyan, yung tatlong independent variable na to, meron silang significant influence or impact na ibinibigay sa ating dependent variable which is identified as employee retention, which is the intention of the employee to stay. So napakalinaw ng ating graphical illustration, napakalinaw din ng relationship na ini-establish. Then after that, sabi ng Sir Giovanni, di ba, kailangan ma-explain natin yung mechanism. And sa pinakababa dapat ng ating figure or ng ating graphical illustration, mapapakita natin dito yung mga mechanism na meron tayo. So, paano tayo nag-start ng pagpapakita ng mechanism? The first thing that the researchers did is that they explained what is being in the center of this framework, which is job satisfaction. They explain the context of job satisfaction. Ano ba yung ibig sabihin ng job satisfaction? What are the factors that might affect the job satisfaction na technically mame-mention or matatouch din sa kanilang study. Take note ha, when you discuss the variable on your research paper, kailangan yung mga terms, yung mga jargons na i-mention nyo dyan, yung mga elements na i-mention nyo dyan should be mentioned as well or should be measured as well sa mga susunod na part ng research paper niyo. Hindi pwedeng display lang. Okay po, so na-mention dito yung nature of work, compensation, relationship with the colleagues, and opportunities for growth. So more or less, itong mga bagay na to, mame-mention or magagamit ng mga researchers sa mga susunod pang part ng kanilang paper. And then, na-discuss na din yung sunod na variable, which is organizational commitment. Katulad ng ginawa sa job satisfaction, diniscuss din kung ano yung ibig sabihin ng organizational commitment. And then after that, the workplace. No? Diniscuss din ang ibig sabihin ng workplace. And then after they discussed the variables that they have is that they connected it with the theory, no? Pero before nilang ikinonect yung theory, minention muna nila that these three key variables such as job satisfaction, organizational commitment, and workplace structures directly affect, okay, on the dependent variable, which is the employee retention. Okay, they have mentioned here that if you want that your employees will stay on the organization, kailangan meron silang mataas na job satisfaction, organizational commitment, and last one ay effective workplace structures. Saan nila kinuha ito? Ano ang naging basis nila para ma-develop yung kanilang causal framework? Diyan ngayon papasok yung kanilang theoretical framework. Okay, there you go. Di ba sabi ko sa inyo kanina or na-mention ko when we discuss about theoretical framework should not be a display only. Dapat yung mga key areas na meron yung theory na to ay magagamit sa mga susunod pang part or mame-mention pa sa mga susunod pang part ng research paper. O di kaya naman, this will serve as the support or the basis for the next part of your research paper. And this explanation is now being applied on the causal framework. So more or less, dalawang frameworks ang gagamitin nila sa study nila. They will be utilizing theoretical framework and the conceptual framework, which is the causal framework. At ang naging basis nila for their causal framework is yung kanilang theoretical framework. Okay po? So this is the basis nila, no? Yung Herzberg and social exchange theory ang kanilang naging basis for their independent and dependent variable. Okay, di ba ang ganda ng pagkakalatag ng kanilang causal framework? Kitang-kita mo yung relationship ng theoretical framework at ng causal framework ng study nila. So katulad ng na-mention ko, they utilized two conceptual framework. First is theoretical framework and the second one is causal framework. Ngayon, Sir Joanny, paano po halimbawa wala po kaming theoretical framework na gagamitin sa paper po namin? Ano po yung magiging basis po namin for the identification of the variables na ilalagay po namin halimbawa sa causal framework? Ang magiging basis nyo na lang dyan is yung mga readings ninyo. O di kaya naman yung discussion sa inyo ng inyong research teacher. Na, halimbawa, sinabi ng research teacher ninyo, okay, based on your research study, ito yung independent variable ninyo, ito yung dependent variable, at ito yung mediating variable. And from that, kayo na yung bahalang mag-construct ng, halimbawa, causal framework na gagamitin sa study. Kasi nga, wala tayong theory na ginamit. But if possible, sana, maka-adapt kayo ng theory. Okay po? Then after that, no, after the presentation of the mechanism, ano yung naging basis for the independent and dependent variable, the next thing that you have to do is to explain the selection, bakit causal framework ang ginamit ninyo on your study. What is the underlying justification on that? Okay po. So that's how we compose. That's how we do what we call causal framework. So ang tandaan nyo lang ha, when it comes to the selection of conceptual framework that you will be using on your paper, the basis should always be our objective, our intention, and advice and guide being provided by our consultant and research teacher. So thank you so much for listening and God bless everyone.